The moon. Since the dawn of humanity, men have raised their eyes to the sky and admired its beauty. Its ethereal beauty has inspired myths, legends, songs, and poems. And in the darkest nights, it has guided the steps of travelers and explorers with its silvery light. If men from all places and eras had been observing and studying the moon for millennia, the origins of our satellite remain shrouded in mystery even today. But the secrets of the moon are not limited to its origin and formation. Numerous historical and scientific documents confirm the existence of enigmatic anomalies that challenge our understanding. Today, we will embark on an extraordinary journey into the darkest side of our satellite. We will hear incredible historical testimonies, witness with our own eyes inexplicable events, and analyze bold theories that revolutionize our perception of the reality around us. But before we begin this exciting journey filled with shocking and mysterious events, as always, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and not miss new videos.
Did you see that light? It's incredible. Can you pinpoint its exact location? I couldn't say. It's out there, and it's following us.
On July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 made history as the first manned spacecraft to land on the moon. However, this was merely the culmination of a long space race that, for years, pitted the Soviet Union against the United States. For decades, the competition for space exploration involved the world's brightest minds and the most advanced technologies. For the two world powers, conquering space meant not only achieving scientific and technological primacy, but also exercising strategic control over the skies of the entire planet. Those were also the years of the nuclear arms race and the standoff between the Soviet Union and the United States. The space race, therefore, was not solely driven by pioneering spirit and scientific interest, but also by political balances and global geopolitical interests. Briefly summarizing those frantic years of achievements and milestones, we can say with certainty that up until 1969, the Soviet Union was clearly ahead, having surpassed the Americans in all the major accomplishments. The Soviets were the first to send a living being into space. First with the dog Laika, and shortly after with the cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin. They were the first to send a probe to the moon, the first to photograph the far side of the moon, the first to send a woman into space and conduct a spacewalk, and finally, the first to send a probe to Mars and Venus. Until 1969, the Soviets represented the forefront of space research, a fact that greatly alarmed Western allies. With the moon landing, the United States claimed its first significant achievement, an achievement they replicated with 6 more missions in which astronauts set foot on the surface of our satellite. If the success of the Apollo missions had restored a sort of balance between the two powers, the next step would be to lay the groundwork for the construction of the first human outpost on the moon. Whoever succeeded in this endeavor would gain undisputed political and military supremacy. To understand the scope of such an achievement, imagine a large-scale nuclear conflict. Whoever had control of the moon could coordinate attacks independently of what was happening on Earth. The Apollo missions thus represented an extraordinary initial success. 20 were planned, but after the 17th mission and the 6th lunar landing, the program was halted due to a lack of funding and subsequently shut down. The Soviets also no longer attempted to send humans to the moon, focusing their efforts on creating a space station. This goal was later successfully realized, and over the years, it led to collaboration between Russian and US space agencies, right up to the present day, where unfortunately, we know that global power balances are once again at stake. But what were the reasons that led to the end of the conquest of the moon? In 1976, just a few years after the last moon landing, Bill Kaysing, a former employee of Rocketdyne, one of the companies involved in developing rocket engines for the Apollo program, published the book We Never Went to the Moon. In this book, Kaysing questions the authenticity of the Apollo missions and suggests that it was all just a hoax. From that moment onward, right up to today, thousands of publications and documentaries have addressed the subject, raising doubts about the truth of the lunar missions and gaining considerable traction with the public. But is it really possible that NASA's missions were just a deception? Is this the reason behind the sudden closure of the Apollo program? As mentioned at the beginning of the video, the space race was not only driven by pioneering and scientific interests, but also by geopolitical ambitions and aspirations for political and military supremacy. Until 1969, the Soviets had achieved the most important milestones in the space race, but they could not keep pace in the race to the moon. Their project failed miserably, and this happened due to the death of a mysterious figure. At the helm of all the Soviet space successes was a brilliant man who often operated under the veil of secrecy, and was publicly referred to as the chief designer. His identity and contributions only became widely known after his death. This man was Sergei Korolev. Korolev, in addition to being the architect of the most important Soviet missions, was also in charge of the project known as N1L3, which was supposed to take Soviet cosmonauts to the moon. But in 1966, due to complications from a routine surgical operation, Korolev died, and with him, the most productive mind of the Soviet space program. Korolev's death created several leadership problems within the Soviet space program, which fell behind in the race to the moon. After a series of setbacks, the Soviets abandoned the idea of sending a cosmonaut to the lunar surface. However, when, in 1969, American astronauts set foot on the moon for the first time, the Soviets were not passive spectators of their success. During those days, with the Luna 15 project, they sent a probe to our satellite with the goal of collecting samples from the lunar surface. At least that was the official purpose of the Soviet mission. But considering the timing and overlap with the Apollo mission, it is not far-fetched to imagine that the Soviets, with Luna 15, aimed to spy closely and gather information on the Apollo mission. In fact, after orbiting the moon several times and waiting for the American astronauts to touch the lunar surface, the Soviet probe attempted to land, but crashed on the moon's surface. Therefore, imagining that the Americans could have faked a moon mission is very difficult, because not only did they have the eyes of the entire world on them, but they also had an eye watching them very closely on the moon itself. Moreover, it is even harder to believe that they could have repeated the hoax 6 more times. Such a move would have been too bold and risky. The idea that there could have been a silent agreement between NASA and the Soviets in exchange for future mutual collaboration is also unlikely. As we have seen, excluding the Apollo project, the Soviets were first in every area of the space race. If the Apollo project had truly been a hoax, why would the Soviets have shared their technology with the Americans, if the latter had only staged a performance? Furthermore, those who claim that even if the Soviets had informed the world that the Apollo missions were a deception, no one would have believed them, are making an error in judgment. While part of the Western world might have rejected this idea, the rest of the world, not aligned with the West, would have embraced this news enthusiastically. Therefore, it is clear that if we analyze all these events precisely, it is difficult to imagine a lunar conspiracy by NASA. However, it is also true that some of the anomalies reported by lunar conspiracy theorists are real. For example, this is one of the most famous photos, where we see an astronaut descending from the lunar module. Now, anyone with basic photographic knowledge immediately notices that this photo has some inexplicable anomalies. The astronaut, despite being in a shadowed area, is perfectly illuminated, and this is not possible unless there is a large reflective panel illuminating him, or a powerful cinematic spotlight. And it is undeniable that something is illuminating the subject in this photo, as we can see it reflected in the astronaut's boots. Someone has tried to explain this anomaly by stating that the astronaut in shadow, along with the lunar module, was illuminated by the reflection of sunlight hitting the suit of the astronaut holding the camera. However, this is not possible. To achieve such an effect, it would be necessary to use a reflective panel much larger than an astronaut's white suit, and therefore, unless there are unknown physical and environmental conditions on the moon, this explanation does not hold. The photo we just examined is only one of many that present anomalies. However, for now, we won't delve further into this topic, as it would require a dedicated video to be addressed thoroughly. But starting from the assumption that it is very difficult, if not improbable, that the lunar missions were a hoax, and that the unclear nature of the photographic anomalies may have other explanations, one question remains. Why did NASA, after its incredible successes, abandon the idea of conquering the moon? Were the reasons behind the end of the lunar missions purely economic and political, or was there something else? Before attempting to answer this question, we must examine some mysterious aspects that for centuries have sparked debates among anyone who has observed the moon. But to fully understand the significance of this issue, we need to take a step back. Our satellite has always been observed and studied, and this continuous observation has led to the recording of a large number of inexplicable phenomena over the years. Among these recorded anomalies are sudden flashes, bright spots, intermittent lights, unknown objects near our satellite, and much more. It is important to emphasize that these observations are not the result of random or unreliable testimonies, but have been observed and recorded by eminent professional astronomers and official observatories. They are now known as transient lunar phenomena. The number of recorded phenomena is immense. In the late 1960s, NASA compiled an official document, which you can find in the video description, listing all the anomalies recorded from 1600 to 1967. To get an idea of the scope of the phenomenon, consider that the Monte Mario Observatory in Rome, which also compiled a catalog of all the anomalies, has recorded over 600 transient lunar phenomena from the 1800s to today.
April 24, 1874. From the lunar surface, objects of dazzling brightness detach and head rapidly into space. July 31, 1896. A dark spherical object crosses the solar disk. February 12, 1919. In the lunar region of Funarius, an enormous, perfectly straight beam of light projects into space. November 8, 1954. A red glow is observed near the rim of the Kepler crater.
But for these inexplicable phenomena, we don't just have written documentation, we also have extraordinary images. For example, in 1953, Leon Stewart photographed this bright flash right on the terminator line, which divides lunar day from night. This is how the Aristarchus crater appears, one of the most mysterious places on the moon, where the highest number of transient lunar phenomena have been recorded over the years. Astronauts of the Apollo 12 mission, for example, reported seeing a strange glow around the crater. And the Soviet probe Zond 3 also recorded a mysterious bright flash near the crater on October 29, 1963. Some of the most interesting testimonies of mysterious lunar activities come from the Apollo mission astronauts. During the Apollo 11 mission, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin reportedly saw strange flashes and lights on the lunar surface. Aldrin also spoke of a mysterious glowing object that followed the lunar module. Apollo 12 astronaut Pete Conrad reported seeing intermittent lights during his stay on the moon. Similarly, Apollo 15 astronauts James Irwin and David Scott reported seeing flashing lights that seemed to move across the Hadley Apennine crater. Apollo 16 astronauts John Young and Charles Duke also testified to seeing strange lights during their mission, which appeared to move irregularly. Finally, Apollo 17 astronaut Eugene Cernan reported seeing unusual lights that seemed to follow the lunar module. Cernan spoke of flashing lights that he couldn't fully explain. The testimonies of the Apollo mission astronauts seem consistent with what astronomers around the world have been recording for centuries during their observations of our satellite. Added to this are the reports and images from amateur astronomers who, in recent years, claim to have recorded anomalies on our satellite. It is not easy to ignore such a large body of evidence. Something we do not fully understand seems to be affecting our satellite, and these mysterious events have been recorded for hundreds of years. But what could it be? There are many hypotheses attempting to explain these strange phenomena. Official science, for example, talks about meteorite impacts, gas emissions, or other natural phenomena that could have deceived even the most experienced observers. Clearly, this large number of anomalous events has given rise to less orthodox theories that, as we will see, have involved unsuspected figures and prominent personalities. An often cited and certainly unusual event is the first press conference held on August 12, 1969, by astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, after their return to Earth and immediately following their quarantine period. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins appeared very tense and less enthusiastic than one might expect for an event of such historical significance. The impression many observers had was that something had happened that deeply disturbed them. Others, however, believed this behavior was due to media pressure and the stress of the event, but this explanation is not entirely convincing, particularly because it involved all three astronauts and seems even stranger when compared to footage of Gagarin recorded after his first spaceflight. Gagarin's demeanor was very different, and he was certainly not subject to less media and political pressure. Another detail that has further fueled suspicions is the subsequent lives of the astronauts who were part of the first moon landing, particularly Armstrong and Aldrin, the first two men to walk on the moon. Armstrong withdrew into a private life, rejecting all offers for public and commercial roles. Aldrin, on the other hand, fell victim to depression and alcoholism, and it was only after many years that he managed to overcome his alcohol addiction.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
These words spoken by Armstrong on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of Apollo 11 have also sparked much debate. What does Armstrong mean by truth's protective layers? But it's not just the Apollo 11 astronauts who have made ambiguous statements and exhibited unusual behavior. Edgar Mitchell, astronaut of Apollo 14, for example, openly spoke after his mission about being convinced that Earth has been visited by extraterrestrials, and he criticized what he perceived as a cover-up by the government. Even though Mitchell reported not seeing anything strange during the Apollo mission, he nonetheless stated that his claims are based on information he gathered after his career at NASA. Al Worden, astronaut of the Apollo 15 mission, declared his belief that humans are descendants of ancient aliens, and astronaut Gordon Cooper, although he didn't fly on Apollo missions but rather in the Gemini program, claimed to have seen strange objects and mysterious lights during his military and space career. This type of statement isn't exclusive to American astronauts. Cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, the first man to perform a spacewalk, also mentioned in some interviews that he had witnessed unexplained luminous phenomena during his missions. Adding to these accounts are the statements of Vladimir Kovalyanok, cosmonaut of the 1981 Salyut 6 mission. Kovalyanok reported seeing an unidentified object through his camera lens and described it as a luminous body that changed shape. The testimony of cosmonaut Gennady Strekalov is also very interesting, as he recounted seeing an unidentified object during a mission in 1990. Strekalov described a spherical luminous object that appeared and disappeared quickly. These statements are significant for at least two reasons. First, they were made by highly reputable individuals, and second, there was no apparent personal gain in promoting these stories. But as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, the very structure and nature of our satellite remains a mystery, one that has been further fueled by discoveries made during NASA missions. The Moon indeed has characteristics that can be described as unique. For example, its size, when compared to the moons of other planets in the solar system, appears unusual. The Moon has a diameter that is approximately 27% that of Earth, making it quite large relative to its parent planet. No other planet in the solar system has a satellite so large compared to its own diameter. The moons of other planets are much smaller. Ganymede, for example, the largest moon of Jupiter, has a diameter of just under 4% of Jupiter's diameter. Another unique feature of our satellite is its apparent size when observed from Earth. The Moon, despite being 400 times smaller than the Sun, appears to be the same size because it is 400 times closer to Earth, making total eclipses possible, where the Moon completely obscures our star. As we know, the Moon always shows the same face to Earth, thanks to synchronous rotation between the two celestial bodies. But these features we have listed are not just scenographic. The characteristics described are essential for our planet. They stabilize the Earth's axis, which without the moon could experience much wider variations in tilt, with devastating impacts on climate, seasons, and even the existence of life itself. To try to understand more about the structure of our satellite, during the Apollo missions, astronauts placed various seismometers on the lunar surface. During the Apollo 12 and 14 missions, the lunar modules that were part of the spacecraft were intentionally crashed into the moon to generate seismic waves. What happened surprised everyone. The impact of the lunar module caused a quake that lasted nearly an hour, and this occurred every time the experiment was attempted. This strange phenomenon indicated that the core of our satellite was not composed of solid, hard rock as had been imagined up to that point, but that it might have much less dense or even fluid zones. This discovery reopened hypotheses about the origin of our satellite, which to this day remain unclear. Some Russian researchers, analyzing the phenomenon, have hypothesized that the moon could be hollow inside and that its origin may not be entirely natural. Another curious phenomenon recorded by the Apollo missions is what has become known as rolling boulders. The observations of the astronauts and analysis of the images taken on the lunar surface revealed the presence of massive boulders that, without any apparent reason, moved and left behind drag marks. This phenomenon, photographed by the Apollo mission astronauts, has also been confirmed by more recent observations made with new probes that have explored the lunar surface. What's even more extraordinary is that these boulders have moved in recent years. They appear in different positions compared to the first photographs taken during the Apollo missions. It has been hypothesized that this movement could be caused by meteorite impacts that, upon striking the lunar surface, hurl rock fragments. However, this explanation is not entirely convincing, as the drag marks left by these massive boulders show much more complex paths. A well-known example is found in the Tycho crater, one of the moon's youngest and best-preserved craters. Images of the crater show numerous tracks of boulders that seem to enter and exit the slopes of the crater, suggesting that these boulders moved after the crater was created and, therefore, cannot be the result of the impact. Another hypothesis is that the movement of these rocks is caused by lunar quakes, but this theory also does not fully satisfy what we observe. Is it possible for a quake to be so strong that it pushes massive boulders up the slope of a crater? Thanks to the seismographs placed on the moon during the Apollo missions, we also know that no quakes exceeding the 5th degree of the Richter scale have been recorded on our satellite. So, how is it possible that these boulders moved? Were they moved by someone or something? At this point, we can begin to summarize all the topics we have discussed today, and what we can say is that our satellite is extremely enigmatic. Its observation, which has taken place since the dawn of humanity, has revealed anomalous events that have been confirmed by the relatively recent lunar missions. The presence of enigmatic lights, inexplicable flying objects, and incomprehensible phenomena like the rolling boulders are, on the one hand, a challenge for our scientific knowledge, while on the other, they open up intriguing possibilities that lead several independent researchers to speculate that unknown activity may be present on the moon. But what could be the origin of this activity? But this raises another question. Could the sudden interruption of the Apollo program be related to these mysterious phenomena? As we mentioned earlier, the Apollo program was suspended due to a lack of funding and political and scientific interest. As we know, the lunar program cost the US administration vast sums of money. However, it is also true that by the time the program was halted, most of the costs related to technology development had already been incurred. And although the lunar missions were expensive, they were not greater than the costs that were later incurred to finance new space exploration missions. For example, the shuttle program, during its years of operation, cost approximately $200 billion. Additionally, the closure of the Apollo program marked the end of a technology and a massive industrial chain that, over the years, had involved millions of citizens and scientists. It also marked the end of the potential colonization of our satellite. Can all this be explained solely as a political and economic choice? Or is there something else we are not aware of? Is it possible that the anomalies, recorded and testified over all these years, played a role in the matter? The more extreme theories suggest that these phenomena are consistent with the activities of a civilization other than our own. Alternatively, these strange phenomena could be the remnants of an ancient colonization of our satellite by an advanced civilization once present on our planet. Clearly, we do not have an answer to this question, but what is certain, as we have seen together in this video, is that the moon and everything connected to it is extremely fascinating and full of mysteries. At this point, we are really curious to hear your opinion. Write in the comments what you think, and if you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support our work. See you in the next story.